Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In. We're on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios. By the time you hear this episode, we will have first ball action, day of, actually. Joined now by Nick McCarvel, journalist who's been on the show before, a lot to discuss. He's been at the Open. He's been really chasing the tennis calendar all North American hardcourt season. But Nick, welcome back to the podcast. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, hey Mitch. Greetings from a busy press room on the eve of the U.S. Open. I know when most people listen, it'll be the U.S. Open has started, as you say, but it's been a really buzzy week here, getting ready for the U.S. Open, and I think they had something like 120,000 fans here through the gates for Fan Week alone, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, the buzz is real.
How and I can't wait because it's a big occasion. We're doing this on the weekend. We just can't wait till tomorrow. One more sleep, as they say. But how has your schedule been? Following the tennis calendar. I know you were working Cincinnati into the qualifying, which was a beast that we'll get into entirely. But how's it been? The ramp up, which a lot of people start tuning in on the ride, but you've kind of been in it the whole step.
Yeah, actually, I oftentimes love my, last year I did Toronto. I've done Toronto a few times, but this year I didn't do Toronto. I did Cincinnati. I was on court 3. I was one of the MC hosts there. And it's cool, Mitch, because you get to feel the kind of like vibe of how players are feeling and what the tension is. And, the conditions in Cincinnati are quite similar to the US Open, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's been good. And then I had one day off, like flew to New York, and I will say, like, I've done Fan Week now for several years, especially since 2020. They've really ramped it up.
Yeah.
And it felt like nothing really I've ever seen before, and I especially loved it. Yesterday there was a ton. The crowds were amazing for some of the qualifiers, and like to qualify for a slam,
Yeah.
I think for a lot of them to qualify for your first slam and to do it in front of, like 4, 5, 6 people deep on these side courts is pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing you said I wanted to hark back to, you were court 3 Cincinnati. And if I have that correct, court 3 Cincinnati was one of the matches that I enjoyed the most in the tournament, which was Monfils Norrie early on. Were you there for that one?
Yeah, it was. And I mean, we had a few different great matches on Stadium 3. We had Djokovic doubles. That was his first match since Cincinnati. We have Wawrinka.
Yeah.
But Monfils just turns it out, and people love him so much. I think they obviously love the style and sort of the showmanship. But then I think he's also grown into kind of this cult. Like, people love that he's elongated his career, and I mean, that was as packed as we had all week was Monfils Norrie. Yeah.
So many storylines in tennis this year alone, but Monfils kind of getting overshadowed for what he's been able to do coming back from the injury and keeping it going, as you said. Getting to the U.S. Open qualifying, because you brought up another great point that these tournaments, these qualifying tournaments across the board, even for majors, don't necessarily have the fan support that the U.S. Open had. So qualifying got through. I think that's the first thing, right? It was a struggle. Mother Nature almost didn't allow it, but props to everybody involved for getting us through. And, an exciting qualifying event that saw some players make their name and make their mark to get in. I'll start with, though, love the ceremony I saw on Twitter where they present the ball to the players that, get through the Open, because a lot of these players haven't done it before. So to be honored like that by the head of the USTA was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, I think the one at least that I saw was Zach Svajda, which, I mean, he's played the U.S. Open before, so maybe not as special, but I think too, like the USTA has tried to do like different things around, obviously I'm working for them here, but you look at like the different things that these different tournaments try to do. And I think giving them the like ceremonial ball and a framed photo and like have this whole moment of qualifying for a main draw at a major. And I think too, Mitch, like we talk about, the ATP just unveiled this like financial security program if you're in the top 200 baseline. We talk a lot about the financial challenges for top 200. I mean, for tennis players in general, but first round of the U.S. Open's $80,000. Like that's going to go far if you're trying to level up your game. And now we know that you need investment to get to this next level. So yeah, I agree with you. I like the ceremonial parts of it too.
Yeah, they're making steps. I mean, some could argue, and we're not going to do it now, but it's, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to be a process, and it's getting better. And I think that's the beautiful part of this. I mentioned Mother Nature. I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of qualifying what stood out, because to me, the first story was the Fiona Crowley story to get in, but having her match suspended at like 5-all in a deciding set tiebreaker was pretty exciting. But what stood out for you in the qualifying tournament, the highs, maybe some of the lows of what you saw?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to me, Mitch, is that the margins are so thin, right? You just look at all these players and the talent levels that's there. I did on Friday afternoon, I did the world feed. So we're bouncing all over from, the end of the Timea Babos Fiona Crowley match. And then we're going over to Tana Sengren, and then we're going to Hugo Gaston and like the Fiona Crowley thing, amazing. And then to see Zach Svajda, I think, who's got just like such pure, beautiful ball striking. But then actually, like you say, like the heartbreak of it, like Tana Sangren was playing a French player who I'm blanking on his name, but he's up 5. I think he served for the match at 5-3, 5-4 in the third set. And you could just see that he completely capitulated, and the pressure, and you get to these moments where that can be really tough. We were just talking about on US Open Radio about Borna Goyo qualifying. I think there's a lot of, he's a beast. He looks really good. He's got the titanium. He's got the dyed hair right now going on. But I think, yeah, the margins to me, that's the biggest thing. And then I really do love that people can come for free. I said 130,000. I think that's accurate. 120. And get up close and see. Obviously, a lot of people are going to like the star practices, watching, Iga, Carlos, Coco, Francis, whoever in the big stadiums. But like seeing the qualifying up close is pretty cool, pretty brutal, though, because the margins are so slim in that way.
Yeah, the other one that unfortunately stood out to me was Max Cressy. That was a tough loss. I think it was like a really long, heavy tie break late, struggling. And that's how tennis is. You ride the hot hand, and there's peaks and valleys, and there's a lot of ups and downs. But we'll see now with the Open starting. I did want to mention some of the lighter stuff too. You're always a mainstay at the fun events, the charity events. The stars of the Open tennis was pretty exciting to see. You had some celebrity appearances. You had Alcaraz, Tiafoe out there. Iga made her appearances, just to name a few. But what was that experience like? Because not only is it essentially it's very popular, but we're starting to see the crossover now. We're starting to see basketball players and entertainers really, buy into the lead up to the U.S. Open.
Yeah, and I think that's actually been kind of the theme of this last week is what is the crossover, and there's a lot of different ones that are going on culturally with a lot of the American players. I think we're on the morning TV shows just last week.
Yeah.
But Stars of the Open, we had it was cool because, Jimmy Butler, Miami Heat, obviously Jimmy Buckets comes and, he's got 10 million Instagram followers, but he's more like a one name household name for a lot of people. People know who Jimmy Butler is. And I have to say, Mitch, like Blair Henley and I went back into the green room, and he's like fully kitted up in his ball crew outfit, and he's like pumped and he's nervous. And, here's this like NBA icon who's 6'8" and like, ripped as shit. And he's like so excited to go out on court with Carlos and Francis. And then I think those clips obviously did really well online. They also had Sebastian Yatra, who is a global recording artist. Some people will absolutely know who he is. Other people have no idea, but 30 million Instagram followers. But they did a whole buildup of him with Rafa and then with Carlitos. So, yeah. And I think finding, like in March, I did the Desert Smash fundraiser, and we had Pink come, and she was so into it. And I think it's actually the job of the sport to find these people, the Jimmy Butler, Sebastian Yatra, Pink, the people that are really into it. Then you can have that cultural crossover too.
I remember Pink too. She was taking photos with everybody. It wasn't just like she was coming to see the top players. She was fully invested. And yeah, Jimmy Butler loves tennis. We know. Why else would you go to Argentina on a break to watch Alcaraz play? It's he loves the game. We'll see if the ground strokes get a little better, but he's obviously got his head into it. It's been fun to see the Kids Day stuff, especially. And I even think I saw Djokovic play a couple points with a frying pan.
Yeah, was it a frying pan or a spatula? It was some sort of, yeah, it was some sort of kitchen utensil that is like really like Novak. I mean, we already knew that he was one of the most like pure ball strikers, and the next time give him a number 2 pencil and he'll be fine. So
Have you been surprised at all, or is this what you expected, that the crowds, the matches haven't started yet, but it's been a few years since they've seen Novak, and it seems like they love him, and maybe as much or if not more than ever, given the fact that he hasn't been here. And also, he is the last of his era, the last of that generation of the big three, essentially, with Nadal and Federer out this year and beyond. But Novak's love and that crowd adulation, did that surprise you at all?
no, I mean, yeah, I'll say in Cincinnati, like one of the first nights, watched this like huge group of people walking through the grounds, and I kind of like went over there to see what was going on, and Novak was just walking to his practice court. I think the crowds actually were like very supportive and welcoming to Novak. I noticed like a little bit of lukewarmness in New York, but it's obviously the first time he's been back in the state since the vaccine mandate has been lifted. And I think, yeah, like you say, like people have this like great respect for him being a part of the era that he is. And I think we saw in Cincinnati too, in that final against Alcaraz, like he's pushing himself so much, and maybe just starting to show it a little bit too, Mitch. Like the physicality is that's not like, at times it's felt like Novak is like, not human. And I felt like we were getting a little more of the like human feel from him. But yeah, I will be curious, and the New York crowd can be a little fickle. But for the most part, the feedback, especially in Cincinnati, I haven't seen as much here in New York, has been massive for him. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that New Yorkers also remember those heartfelt moments, and it's easy to forget 2021 when he didn't get the calendar slam. He gave a pretty good speech, and the crowd did, shower him with praise, maybe for the first time truly, and I think that's going to go a long way too. I think New Yorkers are a certain way, but they definitely remember when you show them love.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I do agree with that, and I think that yeah, he's here to win the slams. Like that is, I mean, obviously he wanted to win Cincinnati. I think it bolsters his chances. He and Alcaraz obviously on opposite sides of the draw, but I think that he is very clear that he's here to win, and I think he does kind of like being on the island of, you still got Murray, you still got Wawrinka, but he is on this like sort of island of elite, and I think that he's enjoyed that a bit too.
Absolutely. And he, along with Carlos Alcaraz, the two co-favorites, essentially, Djokovic jockeyed in front of him with that epic win in Cincinnati. And one thing I want to say about that, and I'm interested in your perspective, obviously the tennis is amazing whenever they link up, and there's no sure things in tennis, which is why I bring up this point. I don't want to take for granted any of these matchups, regardless of where they're played. And also, we've learned in the past, right, that Federer and Nadal never played each other here. So while we're all maybe salivating for the match of Djokovic Alcaraz, there are no guarantees, and there is no, certainty that this will happen. So I do think anytime they play, we got to appreciate it, given the age and the respective, miles, especially on Djokovic.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, Cincinnati was that opportunity. I mean, obviously it came 5 weeks to the day after the Wimbledon
Yeah.
final, which was immense. But
Yeah.
I agree with you on that, and I think at times the tennis actually wasn't like that high of quality, but the drama was always there, and the fact that it
100%
felt,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, the fact that Novak was like down and out, then comes back in the second set, saves the championship point. And also, I haven't really seen Carlos express himself. Like he sat down, I was courtside at that point. He sat down in his player bench after the second set and pounded the arm of it. I mean, like really let out some anger, frustration and anger. And I actually think that's a good, I don't think
Yeah.
Carlos has faced that kind of stuff very many times before. So I think that was a maturation moment for him. And then I'm curious, he's been such a sponge the last couple of years, Mitch. I'm curious how he then turns and uses that experience at the US Open, because there's always the argument in sport that you want to peak, at the right moment, right? Not to say that was Novak's peak, but that Carlos was like denied the mountaintop. I don't think that like necessarily hurts him in New York.
No, it's crazy to think a guy that talented can still learn and improve, but we saw areas where it's like, oh, he could clean up some stuff. He can stay focused a little more when he has these big points. But I agree that I think expressing yourself and showing that frustration can be a good thing. And it's while segue into somebody else who's near the top of the contenders list in Yannick Sinner. You know, I know the press conferences, there's some softballs in there, but there's some really intel journalistic questions that get good answers. And I was very struck by what Sinner said about how he's processing losses now. He referenced that French Open match this year, and he said, I can't lose like that again, which was a very mature response. That was a disaster of a match for him down the stretch, and he knows losses will happen, but the maturity process and the learning and how he's done since then, I think, is really shown.
Yeah, and I think you look at, obviously there's been a lot made of the Darren Cahill impact, but I think that that is actually something that Cahill's really brought to his team. And one of the events we did this week in Armstrong, there was a Sinner practice like right up until we came on to do all of our like microphone tests. And just like watching them, you know, they like did this whole like 10 minutes of just working on drop shots, and they did a whole 10 minutes of like going up the line in a forward motion on the backhand to get in off of a short ball. And then to have, as you say, the mentality around what sort of stock are they taking from each of the losses. And I think too, like to be able to win in Toronto, obviously it wasn't the like biggest headline of, you know, he beats Demonor in the final. Now it wasn't the hardest draw, but he gets a Masters 1000 for the first time. He's reached his first major semifinal, having done so at Wimbledon. So I think there's a lot of those building blocks that Sinner's been able to put together too.
He's a for sure contender going forward into this event. The confidence is there. He's getting some continuity. Sinner's definitely one to watch as we move along here with Nick McCarvel on Tennis Channel Inside In. I wanted to talk about some of the women now coming into this tournament, and there's favorites, and we know the battle at the top is pretty tough right now because Iga's coming in the defending champ, hasn't quite been as crisp as in years past. Still very very talented and going deep in all these tournaments, but it's a real race now with her for the number one ranking. Sabalenka is on her heels, and I'm interested to see the pressure, not so much of defending a slam, but that number one spot with a bona fide contender in Aryna Sabalenka. We'll see what happens there. This race could be, it's going to continue to go on, Nick, but it's one of the storylines I'm going to be watching this Open.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And, you know, for Iga, I think a lot, we talk about learning curves, like you said. For Sinner, I mean, for Iga, I think she learned a lot from being reigning champion, defending champion at the French Open, and then was actually able to defend that title. I think that was huge. And you say like I don't know. Last year she wasn't in the best form coming into the U.S. Open either. So I actually think she's in a good, like she made two semifinals, or it was a quarterfinal, semifinal, whatever. She made a couple decent runs. I kind of like where she's sitting. And she said, she did the media day stuff with us for the fans, and she said that, I learned a lot from defending that title in Paris. So I think
Yeah,
she could
and
use it here.
I'm glad you said that because I do think that, in regards to someone like Coco Gauff, who had their breakthrough and beat Iga at that tournament in Cincinnati en route to winning it, people might be overlooking Iga's greatness in the sense that, Coco got her, but that doesn't mean Iga's not still at the top of the game. And I, always be careful of those lurking champions that aren't, getting the respect that they deserve. So I think Iga's in a great position in that regard. Sabalenka is one, though, that she's gotten here not by accident. She's gotten here, she's earned it. She goes deep into the events as well. So the pressure, though, to get to number one, it's that final step. And I think that, pressure is what, determines who these champions are. But Sabalenka is firmly in the mix.
Yeah, I mean the tools are all there, right? For Iga, like you say, but then also for Sabalenka. And we can continue the theme a little bit of like having had learning from every step. And I think for Sabalenka, that French Open semifinal against Mukova, and then the Wimbledon semifinal against Jabeur, those are situations where then she's gonna have to use that, Mitch. And think of last year, she was up on Iga 4-2 in the third set here in the semifinals. So she gets the Australian Open, which is big, but then utilizing those experiences And it feels like now we've arrived at this point in the women's game where you do have all of these players like kind of Rybakina's obviously the viral illness I think really has thrown her off this summer. But you mentioned Iga, Sabalenka, Coco, throw in Pagula, and then I do think Ons Jabeur is sitting in a good place as well.
Yeah, if Sabalenka would have won that match at Wimbledon, she would have been number one, and that was the match that cost her there. But you also listed 5 majors in a row where she's made the semifinal or better. So that's, I mean, that's consistency there. Ons Jabeur, and I'm glad you brought her up because she's been pretty open as well, that the match at Wimbledon, the final, took a lot out of her, and processing it was hard. It's hard for any tennis player, who, especially when you haven't won that major, but she's saying all the right things, and she still has the game to get back to the final, if not win this tournament. What have you seen from Ons this week in the lead up, and where are you at with her as she looks to get back to the final?
I mean, wow. You know, she's someone that always gives us, I think, way more than we expect her to in when we speak with her and the insight. And I've heard from, I think a lot of people saw Breakpoint and the disappointment that she faced having made the major final she did last year, Mitch. I've heard that there was even more disappointment from what she faced this year and losing to Vondrousova. But, you know, I think it's going to be, we didn't mention this with Swiatek, but, you know, the balls have changed. These are heavier duty balls. And so I don't know if that is going to help. I think it helps Iga. If you look at the game style of Iga's play, I think it actually hurts Ons a little bit. She made kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment of, you know, I hope Iga's happy. So but I also think that, yeah, it feels like we've arrived to this moment where there is a lot of confidence coming in at the top of the women's game, and I don't necessarily feel as though we've had a moment like this for a couple years in terms of competitive players playing good to great quality that are also operating on like a really high plane of confidence. And that's what makes it really intriguing to me.
Yeah, the depth at the top, I think, is deeper than it's been. We knew about the depth in the women's game, but you have some bona fide contenders where it wouldn't shock you. And I would add Vondrousova to the mix because, look, I mean, she won that unseeded, and I know it was, you know, there's injury. She'd been a major finalist before, Olympic silver medalist, but she's playing the part of a top 10 player. She looks like a bona fide player that's going to be in the deep draws at these majors for a long time to come.
Well, and I mentioned it with Ons. The personality is different, but Vondrousova walks into press room one in here and is like so chill, and there's just, I mean, sometimes I'm kind of like, wait, we need more tension. Like, make it feel like it's more than we can know. But I also think that that's been the secret of, I mean, that's why she won Wimbledon, right? Is because she walked out there and she was playing Ons like she was playing her on a practice court in Prague, not center court in the Wimbledon final. And that's actually not an easy thing to do, like an execution wise,
Right.
in these big matches.
Right. If you want to win Wimbledon, I think that's the key, right? Rybakina and Vondrousova, just act like it's a regular match and keep your nerves in check. I mean, that was, you know, 2 years in a row. It was sensational how they did that. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see at the women's game. And I wanted to kind of just keep moving it along with some of the thoughts going into the Open on both sides to kind of open it up, Nick. The Americans playing here, there's always the pressure and the expectation, but you know that if you play well, the crowd will fall in love with you and fall behind you. On the American front, you know, starting with the guys, who's kind of got your eye in terms of who could go on a run? Tiafoe again. Paul comes in with a lot of run and emotion. Eubanks looking to fill it up. Fritz, of course. Where are we at assessing the guys coming into the U.S. Open?
I really like where the guys are at, you know, and you talk about like having to arrive on the stage, and you know, this is the U.S. Open. We saw it last year with Francis, and he arrived in the moment. He beats Rafa. He follows it up over Rublev. I think for me, I was just, I did another interview a little bit ago, and Tommy Paul is my dark horse pick, not only for the Americans, but for the men, and not to win the title. I mean, he can, but to go deep. He's in the Rublev section of the draw, or excuse me, he's in the Runa section of the draw, Runa's had that back injury, so we're not sure exactly how Holger's feeling. Um, I think him beating Alcaraz in Toronto and then playing him as closely as he did in Cincinnati, I think that has sent like ripples through the American contingent of like, oh, Tommy's like playing toe to toe with Carlos. Like that's huge. And obviously I know it's bigger over 5 sets, but I think that I like his like mental space and where he's been with his tennis this summer a little bit more than Fritz and Tiafoe right now. I'll be very interested to see for, Francis has Lerner Tien in the first round. Taylor Fritz has Steve Johnson. Those are tricky, fellow American first rounds. We saw what happened for Taylor last year against Brendan Holt. So yeah, and then, you look at players like Chris Eubanks, like Ben Shelton, even a guy like Mackie McDonald, Sebastian Corda, can they find some momentum with a couple matches behind them? It's certainly possible.
Tommy Paul is getting a lot of love. You're not the only one, and I can totally see why. The section of the draw certainly helps, but also, yeah, the matches with Alcaraz, and I know 5 sets is different, but he wasn't getting tired in 3 grueling sets, and he was staying right with him, which very few can say. So to follow up that second match where he nearly won again, to get Alcaraz's readjustment and still be there was just tremendous. He's one for sure. I think I've been on record. Fritz needs his moment here. I think it could come this year, and I think it would happen pretty fast. And then, yeah, of course, I'm a little biased, but Eubanks following up Wimbledon with a lot of hype and now seated in a major. I mean, he won his first major match ever at this tournament last year. In my quickly how times have changed.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty insane, and I think that conditions wise, the qualifying headlines are that the courts are playing pretty quick, which we expect them to at the US Open, but that's huge for the huge serve of Eubanks. And then again, I think it's going to be able to, for him, it's intriguing to me because you go from being kind of like a journeyman challenger player to all of a sudden you're on GMA and like he was at the Stars of the Open. He got a roaring applause. Like people like know Chris Eubanks. I mean, I'm guessing, I haven't looked at the order of play, but I'm guessing that's going to be a grandstand match or like something where they're just going to like, people are going to go wild for that. And I think it will be interesting to me, at least I know Chris pretty well. Like, I think he's going to handle it fine, but that's a lot for a player to adjust to and then be able to execute your game plan.
Yeah, grandstand tomorrow afternoon. He's on there, and Kwan will be a tough one, but he's going to have all the love and support, so that'll be fun. A couple more things with Nick McCarvel before we wrap up here on Tennis Channel Inside In. Got to show some love to the American women as well. There's a lot to talk about. Obviously, Goff and Pegula are at the top, deservedly so, but I think there could be some dangerous players coming from the bottom side as well. Sloane Stephens has been better. Kennan's always tricky. We can see Madison Keys make a run, so that'd be the other thing to remember. I know the top is pretty heavy, but especially in the American side, there's a lot of dangerous players.
Well, I mean, you look at Sloane Stephens against Beatriz Haddad-Maia in the first round. I mean, that could be an absolute popcorn match, which I think is amazing. And then, I also think like having Jen Brady back, I think that's infused the Americans with some good energy. Having JB a semifinalist here, obviously Australian Open runner-up in 2021. And I think too, like Pegula and Goff have done well to sort of lead the pack. I mean, Jess has been outspoken of like, I like being called the number 1 American. Like I've earned this spot. I think that's big. It's so hard to predict as someone like Maddie Keys, like what sort of version of her game are we going to get? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I especially think someone like her or like a Sloane, if they get into week 2, they're not going to be phased by being there. And yeah, I mean, a lot of that attention has gone to Pegula and Goff, hasn't it? So we'll see how they can fare.
I gotta throw in, so she doesn't get mad at me, Danielle Collins. She's nobody like her, but that's another player that if she gets going and isn't afraid of anyone or anything out there, could do some damage. So there's a lot to like in that regard. And before we wrap this up, just looking at the guys and the girls, what matches, what players outside of the big names do you think could really do some damage here? Because I have a few. I wanted to see if you have any off the top before I start sharing some.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how Mukova lost in the first round at Wimbledon, but I thought, I was in Cincinnati as we talked about. I think that she, played great tennis there to get to the final. So now and I think her game actually matches up really well at the U.S. Open. So I'm very intrigued there. I'm quite intrigued by how things will play out for Tommy Paul this tournament overall. And then I actually think, the looming question marks for me, like around a Casper Ruud or a Holger Rune, how are they actually going to show up at the final major of the year? I would love to see, I know I'm hopscotching here, Mitch, but I would love to see a Mira Andreeva Coco Gauff second round, because that is certainly a potential. And I do think that Lerner Tien, if he can get stuck in against Francis, Francis has had I would say Francis has had a tough summer. It hasn't been a great. He loses to Wawrinka in Cincinnati the week after he lost to Raonic in Toronto in front of packed houses. So I think, if you're Lerner Tien, if you're team Tien, then you have to be backing your charge. And then I love, I was talking about Vika, like I would love to see the Azarenka. I would love to see a run from her. And that to me thematically then lends to, like, how's the Wozniacki comeback going to go? How's the Nishikori comeback going to go? And then what are we going to get from players like Wawrinka or Gael Monfils, which we were just talking about? I mean, we know that they can play so exceptionally well. Can they do it over 5 sets? The conditions, actually, the forecast, Mitch, isn't too crazy the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I think that, we're not going to have brutal conditions.
Right.
Yeah, that was all over the place. What do you got?
And a lot of that I share. You mentioned his name. I just to say first round match, Milos and Tsitsipas could be something in terms of Milos coming back. His comeback, he beat Tiafoe. There is pressure there for Francis. I wanted to add a name, see where we are with Ben Shelton, what his game looks like, because it has been up and down, a little down at times, but the crowd would just be all about it if he goes on a run, which we've seen. Other names, I mean, it's funny because we said all this and I was guilty of it too, but no one's really talking about Daniil Medvedev, who's won here and made a final and just, ho hum, he's the 3rd best player in the world and kind of enjoys the lurking process. So he would be one to kind of see for me. And then the other name I had, we haven't talked about her, but finalist as well, Leylah Fernandez, what kind of game she has here, and another person that New Yorkers came to know and love. So yeah, the comeback side of it, especially with the mothers on tour, that's a good avenue to consider, because now it's like a competitive, at first it was like a comeback, like it's great to see all of them, which it is, but now they're getting competitive. Like they want to out.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I asked Iga when we did the media day thing about doing the event the other day with Roger Federer, and obviously Ben Shelton was there too. And I mean, Shelton's part of Federer's agency, so obviously they talk a fair amount, I would imagine. But I think, I do wonder, like, is there a little bit of, like, being around Roger and the week before the US Open, and maybe just getting some advice? And, Ben's facing a lot of this stuff for the first time. Yeah, but it does feel like the big show. And I'm curious, obviously the first 3 rounds, you just get so many different storylines coming out. And I think that this one, I feel like we're going to get served a pretty good US Open. I feel like we are primed for some really, really great stories and storylines to unfold.
Yeah, there's so many. And just before I forget, the 2 other players, obviously Svitolina, throw her into the mix, see what she can continue to act to this remarkable comeback. And I wouldn't sleep. The odds are long, but I think Kazakhina could have a good U.S. Open too. She just always seems to be in the mix, and her return game puts her in matches. So won't go all the way and say winning it, but someone that could be very dangerous. But Nick, this has been a blast. I appreciate you, carving out some time here. Last thing as we wrap this up, what's some advice you have for maybe people going to the event? You're kind of a seasoned, a veteran here covering it. So if you're an attendee of the U.S. Open, especially early when there's a lot going on, do you have any tricks or advice you give to people to get the best viewing experience?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually my 15th US Open, which is making me feel a little senior. My biggest tip is if you're coming from the city, take the Long Island Railroad. Don't take the 7 train. I mean, I love a 7 train, but the Long Island Railroad from Penn Station takes 16 minutes, which is amazing. And then, I mean, it's not going to be a big surprise to anyone, but like, get the app, go to the field courts, like go and like sit courtside so that you're like 10 feet away from the court and watch 2 players that you've never heard of, or find someone, you know, from a country you want to support, or find an American that you know, want to support, and get up close. I just think that the field courts are priceless. And then, yeah, obviously like the big stadiums are amazing. And then there is, I don't know what it's called. There's the Lobster Shack. It's over by Grandstand. Go get a lobster roll. You're going to pay like $30 for it, but do it. It's worth it.
It's bucket list. Well, you're speaking my language too. The number one rule of these tournaments is go early when there's so many options, and really go to the outer courts and experience it. But we're delighted to have you on the podcast, an official recurring guest. Good luck with everything, covering the tournament. I know you're going to be busy, but it's a blast to do, and it's a blast to have you on this show. So Nick McCarvel, thanks again for coming on Tennis Channel Inside In.